So as we mentioned earlier, we're using a Regulation A funding structure for this second round of capital for us. We have about $14 million invested thus far. So this Regulation A will allow, as we said earlier, for people from all spectrums to come in and participate as true owners in the physical real estate itself. And just to back up a little bit, I want to speak to what is a Regulation A? How does this work? How is it structured? And so, as mentioned, it's an SEC qualified offering structure that's been around now for over a decade. It allows for issuers, in this case us, to raise a maximum of $75 million in a 12-month period. It goes through that whole gamut of audits and SEC qualification, as mentioned. But ultimately, the other layer that we've added to our Reg A specifically is we have a minimum threshold that we have to hit. That minimum threshold is $8.7 million. And so until we raise that first $8.7 million, slightly under that, it's 8.668 technically. Until we hit that threshold, that money all sits in escrow. And if for some reason we don't end up in a spot where we get to that threshold, all that money will be returned to the individual investors. What happens then, once we hit that minimum threshold, is the central RoRo entity that the offering is under, that entity of which all the investors are part owners of, becomes the majority interest holder in the development site, the actual physical land itself, and that 46,000 plus square foot parcel, but also the license for Phoenix with Atari. The majority interest will now be held once we hit that minimum in those two assets. And so that was part of the reason we put that protection in, to ensure that as people come in early, if the traction isn't where we want it to be or need it to be, then the money will come back through that escrow structure. But obviously, once we do hit that minimum, there's a real tangible sort of majority interest in the overall development itself and where we're going. So we love the Reg A structure. Maybe you want to touch on it a little bit more from your perspective on why we went this direction.
Yeah, we want the community involved, we want the locals involved. And if you invest with us with Atari Hotels, you own a piece of everything. You own a piece of the land, a piece of licensing rights specifically for Phoenix, the development, literally everything that we do. And obviously, once the doors open, then we'll kick out distributions. So this is an investment where you'll get returns on your money. At some point, we'll do a refinance and hopefully recoup about 40 to 60% of your original investment. And then if we ever sell the building, obviously the investors will own 70+% of it.
So when we created this idea, it really came about in late 2019. At the time, Atari was run by a French venture capitalist, a gentleman named Fred Chenet. He had actually taken the Atari stock public on the French stock exchange, which it still sits on today and trades as an OTC here in the States. For all the reasons we already described, we love the Atari brand. We love how it fit in sort of this opportunity to bring a place or create a place for gamers, pop culture enthusiasts, all the different categories. And, so we approached, Fred back then, and eventually he flew out to Phoenix and spoke with Steve Wozniak at Desktech.
Right?
Yeah. And so Fred actually had a 15, 20-minute conversation on stage with Steve Wozniak, who was, people know him for Apple, of course, and what he did with Steve Jobs. But ironically, he also was the creator, the designer of the Breakout game for Atari in 1976. So kind of a fun history lesson and story there. Fast forward to early 2020, we finally secured the license after a couple months of back and forth with Atari, and that license allowed us to move forward under this relationship with Atari. And it was a very exciting time for us. I mean, I remember I was in Colorado for Christmas that year with my kids, and there was a lot of time on the phone with Fred. He was not a guy who took time off. We literally talked on Christmas Day for multiple hours, which didn't go over well with the family, but it was ultimately a necessary thing to get that deal done. And then, of course, we
really
rolled into COVID. Yeah, exactly.
March kind of destroyed everything for at least a good 2 years.
Yeah. So we, like a lot of projects and a lot of things, were impacted in a significant way during the 21 years.
What it did, interest rates started creeping up slowly.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of curveballs for us, certainly. And, but what it did force us to do is it forced us back behind the scenes to really sort of, work through, what does this mean? What does this property really look like from an experience perspective? Who are the right partners to have involved? All those things. And so, as we sort of continued through the journey of COVID and rising interest rates, et cetera, we finally got to a spot in as we mentioned earlier, in mid 2023, where we found this amazing site. Not found it; it was right next to us, right in
Incredible
front of
piece
us.
of land right here in the heart of Roosevelt Rail.
Yeah, and also Wade had taken over by that time. The trajectory of Atari was really trending in all the right directions in that regard as well.
And now the interest rates are dropping. I feel like we're
Rates are coming
prime time
down.
to do
Yeah.
this, pull it off.
Yeah. So yeah, and all those documents, as far as the original license agreement with Atari, the handful of amendments we've done, since that original license to extend some timelines and create some different opportunities, those are all part of the SEC filing. That's again fully transparent and readable for anyone who wants to go take a look at that. And so you can read up on yeah, it's legal docs, right? I mean, some people enjoy that stuff, some people
I
don't.
need
But
a couple weeks.
yeah, bedtime reading, if
Yeah.
you will. But
That'll put you right to sleep.
totally. But it does, paint the full picture of sort of our journey, not just from a real estate perspective and kind of having this site come to life, but also in the context of our relationship with Atari and how that's evolved over the last 5 years.